Those who still held out hope of a handshake in the halls of the United Nations look set to be very disappointed. Donald Trump touting new sanctions on Iran and threatening even more with world leaders gathered in New York at the annual opening of the UN General Assembly. Chances were always slim there'd be a first face-to-face meeting between US and Iranian leaders since before the 1979 revolution. And of course, this was before last week's strikes that incapacitated major Saudi oil installations. Now, EU signatories to the 2015 nuclear deal, Germany, France, the UK, are in fact squarely blaming Iran. The UK, whose leader Boris Johnson now says the US president is, quote, the one guy who can broker a better accord than the one on the table. Is Trump's wish for a full rewrite on the road to reality? Or will it all bring the two sides back to the same nuclear deal from before, just under a different guise? Finally, there's what's going on inside Iran itself. What strategy for a nation feeling the brunt of Trump's maximum pressure policy of sanctions and torn between moderates and hardliners? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at that maximum pressure policy. And with us, retired General Dominique Trinquant, former head of France's UN military mission, and who's seen more than one UN week in his career. Many thanks for being with us. I want to thank as well journalist Celestine Poland.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the show. Annick Cizel, senior lecturer in transatlantic relations at the Paris Sorbonne Nouvelle University.
Good evening.
Thanks for joining us. And attorney and commentator Ardavan Amir Aslani, your latest book in French, From Persia to Iran.
No. Pakistan, from the Mughal Empire to the Islamic Republic.
Oh, dear.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, dear. From Pakistan to Iran. Many thanks for that, Ardavan Amir Aslan. When's the English translation?
It's coming out probably within 7 months.
All right. Well, look forward to it. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag F24debate. You know, last month in Biarritz, there was a G7 summit hosted by France. Some wondered if Donald Trump hadn't turned over a new leaf. He'd left vitriol at the door, was playing along with a format where he had to share the stage. Now, though, for his third UN week speech as President of the United States, it's back to a familiar leitmotif.
Wise leaders always put the good of their own people and their own country first. The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots.
The future does not belong to globalists, it belongs to patriots.
I'm having trouble with the word globalist or globalism because I'm not quite sure what it means. But I mean, if we're saying leaders should put their countries first, I think that's pretty much a truism. Everybody does that. I don't know
people,
what he's discovered.
With his recent firing of his National Security Advisor, John Bolton, people said, oh, that means Trump is going to be less hawkish, but he's still very much, as we heard there, America first.
Yes, I mean, again, I just think it's a kind of a little play of words, whatever, globalist patriot. But at the end of the day, he has actually not been so tough in the Iranian-Saudi crisis, and so, I think he's playing for once a rather cool hand. I mean, in terms of not striking back and calling for more diplomacy.
He's announced new sanctions, though.
Yes, but I mean, that sanctions at this point, I'm not sure sort of really change the state of play, but that would be my opinion.
And Cizel, it's the same Donald Trump that we saw his first time around at UN Week, then the same Donald Trump we saw the second time around at UN Week. Is it, or is it not?
Yes and no. Now this position between patriotism and globalism is not new. This is something he said last year, and except this time he's turning it into a foreign policy doctrine. Globalism, we used to talk about the rise to globalism of the United States after World War II into the Cold War. So definitely the term globalism means that the United States, under his leadership, would be turning its back on the global new world order of 1945, which is not new to any of us who have been observing Donald Trump for the past 2 years. But at the same time, And this is one of the paradoxes in his speech, actually. At the same time, it means he would be retreating from globalism. That is, not necessarily embracing isolationism, but at the same time, sort of not deploying any military hard edge, which is what he is saying at another time in the speech, that he is praising his military modernization and how he is about to unfold the military of the 21st century to keep his edge against China, most definitely. So it's definitely a paradox that he should be turning his back on globalism, possibly turning his back again on internationalism, on the Wilsonian world order of multilateralism and internationalism, that is mediation, dialogue, diplomacy, in order to adopt maximum pressure, which is something that Iran knows by heart, as if they almost wrote the book at this stage.
And again, these new sanctions that have come in, this time targeting the central bank. And in his speech, he said, we're imposing these sanctions on the Iranian people. He said it.
Honestly speaking, I'm not a believer in this maximum pressure strategy that Trump is trying to deploy. I mean, probably the only entity left in Iran that has not been sanctioned by Trump so far is myself. I mean, Trump has sanctioned every Iranian industrial sector. The Iranian central bank that he sanctioned recently, what's that going to change? Nothing. Iran is cut off from the Swiss system. Iran can't sell its oil. I mean, the Iranian people today, pursuant to the US withdrawal from the nuclear agreement, have rallied behind the Iranian regime. He has even managed to lose the support of the Iranian people. And when you talk about maximum pressure, this thing is going on for more than a year so far. What has it managed to achieve? What I'm seeing today, as far as current events are concerned, is the exact opposite. I think that Iranians today are exercising maximum pressure over Donald Trump. Look at the humiliation that the Americans have suffered so far. The downing of their $130 million U.S. asset by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. The annihilation of the Saudi refinery. Did the Americans react? No. 3 or 4 days ago, the general heading CENTCOM, which is the military command center over the Middle East, basically said that the U.S. military is looking at Iran as peer-level enemy, such as China or Russia. That's why the military is no longer an option for the Americans. So if they've gone back to rhetoric, and they basically, after the annihilation of the Saudi facilities, sent 400 soldiers to Saudi Arabia, is that their reaction?
We know that we're entering a election year in the United States.
It goes beyond that. It's not a question of election year. Of course that is, but it's primarily a question of the reaction that the Iranian is going to deploy. Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister, clearly said that it's going to be all-out war should Iranian infrastructure be targeted. I mean, going after Iran is going after Iraq, is going after Syria, is going after Hezbollah, it's going after the Houthis, it's putting the entire Middle East, setting it on fire, and putting 20 million people as refugees en route towards Europe. It's not an easy task.
General Tankon, are people misinterpreting when Trump calls off a strike after that drone attack that happened off the coast of Iran, when Donald Trump refrains from military action? Are they misinterpreting that to mean that he's not acting at all?
No, I think that what people are misinterpreting is that the fact that in the Gulf, generally, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates don't want war at all. So, and the president don't want war at all because he is in the last year of his election. And just go back to the speech he provided. He's facing the General Assembly of UN, but in fact he's talking to his electorate, not to the people, not to the different country. The first part of his speech is only, look what a beautiful administration we've got and what we've done. And then facing the enemy, China, Iran, Venezuela, and all that.
Right, so he's not an isolationist. He's saying we're going to use American might, we're just not going to use military might.
In this instance. I mean, I think...
You've got to see that what he's saying is doing what he's saying, except going to war. He doesn't want to go to war. When he say I'm reinforcing in the Gulf, what have you seen as reinforcement arriving in the Gulf? Nothing. I mean, it's very, very little.
400 soldiers.
Yeah, nothing.
So is Erdogan correct in saying that this maximum pressure isn't working on Iran?
I think it's not working. Yes, certainly. But the big problem is that the pressure now is really on the European. You've seen what the Iranians are saying, and of course we will see what President Macron wants to do.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
France's president, who met with his Iranian counterpart late on Monday, they talked for an hour and a half. And after hinting at last month's G7 summit that Macron would do all he can to set up some kind of sit-down between Hassan Rouhani and Donald Trump in New York at the UN, Trump pouring cold water on that concept.
We don't need a mediator. Iran wants to do something, and I don't think we need a mediator. He's a friend of mine, but we're not looking for any mediators. They know who to call.
Boom, we don't need any mediators. And
Yeah.
yet, Macron hinting to reporters that maybe something could happen this Tuesday. What's he talking about?
Of course, each of them are playing their game. I mean, Mr. Trump needs no one. He's the powerful man in the world. He doesn't need someone. But President Trump is doing his job. I mean, la puissance d'équilibre. What the equilibrium. What the president have said to all the French ambassador. And so, what is important is not really what will happen in the UN. What is important is what will happen on the other side of the First Avenue, in the different hotel, in the corridor, in the, here you've got a lot of meeting. When I was in New York, very often I was surprised. I saw Iranian meeting with US on the hotel on the other side of First Avenue. And I was looking at that and I thought they were not talking to each other. But in fact, they were talking to each other.
For me, the puzzle still is why the attack on the Saudi facilities. I mean, that's an escalation that's undisputed, and the fingerprints are there. There's no deniability. They keep saying Iran is playing a
Is it because
politics of
hardliners were
deniability?
nervous that there could have been a meeting between Trump and Rouhani? Is that why?
If I may comment on this, in relation to Macron's initiative, of course, he is in his role, as General Trancon mentioned. He is playing the old Gaullist card of France becoming the honest broker between two hostile entities. But the French are also committing a huge mistake. They're talking to the wrong people, meaning Rouhani and Zarif, and about the wrong subject. Rouhani and Zarif today are without any decisive power of any nature. Look, when they showed up at the city hall of Biarritz, because that's where they were, not at the G7 meeting, they all expressed a desire that a meeting may have occurred or should occur between the Iranian President Trump. The next day, he had to walk back because the Iranian Supreme Leader told him, stop. So these people who promised to the Iranian population that their daily lives would change pursuant to this nuclear agreement being signed, and disappointed all of them because they overpromised and underdelivered, lack the credibility to strike any deal with the Americans. And second of all, the Iranians are not interested in saving the nuclear deal because they have observed so far that the nuclear deal didn't provide them dividends that they were hoping to achieve.
And do you agree with Donald Trump that he doesn't need a mediator?
Yeah, of course he doesn't. And at the end of the day, no meeting is going to take place between Rouhani and Trump anytime soon. The Iranians understand that what the Americans are trying to achieve is putting the missile issue on the agenda, is putting the Iranian military presence in the area on the agenda. And they're not willing to discuss these issues. That's all they've got left. It's the only winning cards in their poker hand.
Yeah, because just to explain to our viewers, Annick Cizel, the 2015 nuclear agreement is just about the nuclear program. The Americans want the Iranian missile program included in that, and France agrees with the Americans on that.
There's a common platform between, I would think, the European Union and the United States right now, which is threefold, which is definitely reducing the nuclear programs, stopgap on that, cutting down territorial expansion for Iran is multiple in the region, as we were saying, and definitely so trying to, for Israel, it's something which is not debatable, that no Iran military base can remain in Syria across the border, especially with President Trump saying that the Golan Heights now are Israeli. And three, definitely curbing down the missile development systems from Iran. But I wanted to say something about maximum pressure, which is worse than not working on Iran. It's actually backfiring at the United States. Because for months, Iran did not, the multiple voices in Iran, because there are multiple voices there too, did not react like strategic patience was really the Iranian policy. We are not going to go tit for tat. And what's happened is that by adding more sanctions when Iran was not responding, was not retaliating in any ways, what happened is that now escalation is definitely on both sides. And where do we stop? Knowing there are multiple voices being heard in Iran and no consensus at home as to where it is going to stop.
Yes, how do you stop
Two
it?
fundamental things have occurred. First of all, as it was mentioned, Iranian policy towards the U.S., ever since the U.S. withdrawal in May 2018, was heroic patience. We're going to wait this thing out until hopefully Joe Biden lands in the White House. They have discussed that's not a possibility. Now they have totally modified their attitude. They are shooting down drones, confiscating oil tankers, shooting at the Saudis directly or indirectly. They have embarked upon a provocative campaign. Why? Because they are specifically under maximum pressure, and time is playing against the Iranian regime. This thing cannot continue forever.
You said a short while ago that the maximum pressure wasn't working.
No, it wasn't working in the sense that it's not going to compel the Iranians to go to the negotiation table in a state of weakness. But it can't stay like this forever, and they know this. They know that time is against them, and so they need to do something. And what they're doing is exactly what was mentioned, trying to exercise pressure over Europe and compel Europe to act. What this refinery story in Saudi Arabia managed to achieve was basically to gather all the Europeans behind the White House. And we saw it. They all yesterday finger pointed at Iran, saying that Iran was behind the Saudi attacks. This is also a sigh of relief for the Europeans, who have been unable to keep their own side of the bargain as per the provisions of a nuclear deal. France, with its 15 billion letter of credit that never happened, Instex that's become a joke, has been unable to deliver what the French promised. So now it's a sigh of relief.
They're off the hook.
They shot at the refineries. Oh, we're all behind the Americans.
A mistake then by the Iranians?
No, yes, I completely agree. I mean that the tactics or the strategy of Iranian pushing the European to do something now push the European behind the
Back
American,
into the other camp.
which was exactly the opposite a few months ago. And
they don't
of
have a
course,
winning hand. I mean,
something I agree also that the problem is to who you are talking, and probably the hardliners back in Tehran are the people who are doing with the drones, doing with everything, and putting pressure, military pressure, because they know that Mr. Trump doesn't want to go to war, and so is in a very bad position, in fact.
And neither do they. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, peer to peer, maybe, but I think the U.S. military is still
It's
considerably.
Of course, but the Iranians know this. But two things have happened since the Saudi issue. I don't know if you agree or not. First of all, the Americans have lost total mastery over the air. Now, 10 years back, they just had to control their bases and put soldiers around them. Today, their bases could be hit by Iranian drones, jet-propelled drones, Iranian cruise missiles. The Americans have lost the mastery of the air. And furthermore, whether the Iranians are seeking war or not, I'm not sure that they're not seeking war. I'm sure that the conservatives would be quite happy if there's a major confrontation.
Between conservatives and moderates is an important one. We'll pick up on that when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we are looking at a UN week which a month ago held a little bit of promise, if you believe the French president, of some kind of a thaw between the US and Iran. A lot has happened since, including those strikes on Saudi oil facilities. And thus, we heard a hawkish speech earlier by Donald Trump. We're talking about it with the retired General Dominique Trinquant, former head of France's UN mission, military mission. Journalist Celestine Boland is with us, as well as is Annick Cizel, who teaches senior lecturer in transatlantic relations at Paris's Sorbonne Nouvelle University, and attorney and commentator Ardavan Amir Aslani, whose book coming out in 7 months in English will be called
Pakistan, from the Mughal Empire to the Islamic Republic.
Okay, there you go. As the leaders of France, Germany, and the UK met in New York, as Ardavan was saying, and all pinned the blame on that Saudi oil installation attack on Iran, Boris Johnson Monday was sitting down with U.S. television network NBC and saying he would have preferred keeping the existing nuclear deal before saying this.
I think there's one guy who can do a better deal. One guy who understands how to get a difficult partner like Iran over the line, and that is the President of the United States.
Celestine Bowen, Donald Trump is the guy who can get a new deal going. What did you think of Boris Johnson's words there?
Well, I mean, I think he's in such trouble that he's, he's looking to anything to make some friends and, in high places. I mean, honestly, I don't, I'm not sure his mind is really on the Iranian nuclear treaty right at this moment. And, I think, yes, for obvious reasons, yes, the United States is the most powerful nation and the one with the biggest, stake in the region and the most power in the region. So eventually, yes, that's, again, kind of a truism.
When it came to the nuclear issue, up to now, the UK had been distancing itself from Washington. In this particular case, he full of praise for Donald Trump on this issue. Again, is the needle moving, Annick Cizelle?
I'm afraid it is, because, saying I'm afraid, because definitely we need the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council to stick together, plus Germany, that is the signatories to the JCPOA. But most definitely the needle is moving. Donald Trump gave us the answer in his speech, in his address at the General Assembly. There's a free trade agreement, exceptional, I'm quoting the US president, which is in the works. Most definitely Boris Johnson's Brexit depends entirely on this free trade agreement. And if the United States raises the stakes, well, Boris Johnson is going to have to realign himself, maybe not Great Britain, but himself, on President Trump. And this is what he's beginning to do.
And with what consequences for France and Germany, General Tanko?
In defense terms, big difficulty, because UK was a very good ally inside Europe, even with some difficulty in discussion. It was the only army able to do what the French army is doing and going abroad. So it's very difficult. I think that Boris Johnson have no choice. If he leave Brexit as he wants to leave, with no agreement, he just wants to add 1 star to the American flag. That's it. I'm a bit rude, but that's the reality.
The UK is an important player in all this. We saw on Monday this announcement out of Tehran about a British flag tanker that remains, for now, in Iranian waters, by the way. The Stena Impero, it's called. They said it was free to go. It had been held since July 19th for alleged marine violations, but it looked like for tit for tat after the sequestering of an Iranian tanker off Gibraltar on suspicion it was about to violate the Syria embargo. That tanker has since been released. And Ardavan Amir Aslani, you are talking about, well, a former colonial power when it comes to Iran.
Not to Iran. Iran was never colonized by any European country. No. If the UK had a sphere of influence in the southern part of Iran.
Military partner.
And the oil it had.
In south of Iran.
Military partner to Iran in the days of the Shah.
Yes, but Iran was not a British colony. It was nobody's colony.
But I mean, before Mossadegh, the oil was British.
Yes, but not British. It was partly owned by the Iranian state and partly owned by the British. I'm only saying that Iran was not a British colony, contrary to the British Raj in India.
But we have, high-profile cases. There's the tanker. There's the detention of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, this Iranian-British citizen right now in Iran, accused of being a spy by Tehran. It seems to always sour with the UK when it sours with the US.
It has always been the case. References were made to the tumultuous history between Iran and the UK, the overthrowing of the first ever democratic elected nationalist government in Iran in 1953 of Dr. Mossadegh. All that being said, it is true that the British have a tendency to follow U.S. foreign policy in the area. But Britain is a stakeholder in the Middle East.
And do you agree with General Trinquant that Boris Johnson doesn't have a choice, that he's going to have to align himself with Donald Trump?
I think that is the most precise analysis that could have been made in this regard. The reality is that the British have totally sided with the Americans. And when you look at the foreign presence in the Persian Gulf, providing security supposedly, quote, quote, to these oil tankers. You got the British, you got the Australians, you got the Americans. Primarily, that's all. So the British have totally, lined up behind the Americans as far as Iran is concerned, which is not a good point. Because when you talk about the five powers, plus Germany, plus the European Union who signed this agreement, Britain is one of them. Now, that Boris Johnson is saying that it's time for a New Deal, this is a very dangerous sign that he's giving. Why? Because what a New Deal implies that you're going to prevent Iran from ever enriching uranium, because the current agreement goes up to 2025. That's what it means. It also implies they're going to prevent Iran from continuing developing its ballistic missile program, which is something that the Iranians will never, ever abandon, because they still dearly remember the Iran-Iraq war when they were left alone, when the entire planet was shooting missiles at them, and their presence in the Middle East, which they're not going to abandon. And they don't have any inhibitions in stating their support for the Shia here and there. So talking about a new agreement is a no-go for the Iranians. Remember that by the end of 2020, the Iranians are under an arms embargo as far as conventional arms are concerned. 2023 as far as missile components are concerned. If they were supposed to give up their missiles, what would remain for them to assure their security? And look at the hostile environment in which they're situated.
And you certainly had a sense of that earlier in Iran's parliament, the head of the armed forces speaking to MPs, saying he held no enmity towards Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, but ready to take on all comers after news the U.S. was sending those troops to bolster Saudi Arabia's air defenses.
We have repeatedly told our enemies, the sinister United States, the sinister Zionists, that we will stand decisively against any action or intention to assault this country. We will behave towards any perpetrator the same way we behaved towards the criminal drone, and the same way we behaved towards the British offensive vessel next to the British warship.
And again, we get back to what you were saying a short while ago about how the French, well, they have a lot of joint defense agreements with the UK. So where are we headed right now in terms of, is it going to be a rewrite of the nuclear deal? What's going to happen?
No. I mean, it's Lancaster House Agreement, which will be living even after the Brexit. It's a bilateral agreement, which is on nuclear weapons and test mainly, but also on the capacity to build a force together, a joint force. And this will remain.
But with the current political context, are we headed towards a complete rewrite of the JCPOA? It took so many years to draw it up.
No, yes, on the agreement, I agree. It's a major step to say that when Boris Johnson said that there will be a new agreement, because the European position was that we want to rewrite certain parts of the agreement. We want to start from the agreement and then discuss about missile, discuss about involvement in the Gulf, but not a new agreement. So the fact that now he's talking about a new agreement is something very new and very dangerous for all European countries.
Where does it leave Emmanuel Macron?
I don't know. My brain was going halfway across the globe at the moment. I was thinking about the two absentees at the United Nations General Assembly this year that are Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. I was thinking about the other two signatories and what is going to happen. What's the maximum pressure on renegotiating the JCPOA when China steps in? Not so much Russia, but China. And the Organization of Shanghai Cooperation, which used to be an economic forum, which is more and more turning into a military forum, with India and Pakistan standing side by side, which I still need someone to explain this one to me. But which means that the balance of power is shifting also towards the Indo-Pacific, this new region whereby Asia has disappeared, which we call the Indo-Pacific today, which is going all the way to the south. The Indian Ocean is going south to the Hormuz Strait and the Sea of Oman. We are in this region, north of this region, and the rebalancing which is taking place means that China has given a voice to Iran. With the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they've been giving a voice to Iran on the other side of the world to express first potential Iran membership into this cooperation forum. So far, Beijing is saying no. What happens if escalation continues? What happens if the European Union, and especially through the voice of Emmanuel Macron, cannot mediate, cannot bring someone from the United States, maybe not President Trump, I don't know, maybe his new national security advisor, whom I don't know. Definitely it was impossible with John Bolton. Is there a crack in the door now for some sort of mediation, not a photo opportunity between Hassan Rouhani and Donald Trump? This is not going to happen. I don't think the Iranians would like this. But there's an urgency, which is in Saudi Arabia when Aramco is being hit. But there's an urgency which is popping up at the other end of the planet, which is China. And if China comes to support Iran the same way they're supporting Iran economically right now, the same way Russia through the Astana process over Syria, I'm sorry, I'm going around the globe right now, but the same way Iran is not isolated, which is something that maximum pressure has not done. And again, it has been counterproductive. If I place myself in the shoes of Donald Trump, it's been counterproductive. It has sealed a form of informal alliance between Iran, Russia, and China. And this is not good news for the United States.
And Russia definitely second fiddle, the way Annick Cizel describes it, to China when it comes to the stakes on this?
I mean, I have to say I haven't made this tour around the world with you, and I'm following it because it's fascinating, honestly. I think that Russia would like to be more of a broker in here. I think that the answer is...
Because Russia is Iran's ally when it comes to Syria, but also a good friend of the State of Israel.
Yes, but I mean, I think that, you know, the game in the Middle East is, the Israel is sort of à part. I mean, I think it's kind of more bilateral. The Iranian situation, I think, and Syria is more of a kind of geopolitical strategy for Putin. And I think that he's pretty pleased with the fact that he's kept a kind of a good relationship with, by the way, not only with Iran, but also with Saudi Arabia. He hasn't, you know, broken bridges with any of these. So, you know, he's played a weak hand pretty well. But I think that you're right. China is the driving partner.
Ardavan Amir Aslani, on Wednesday, Hassan Rouhani says he's coming with some kind of a big peace initiative. We're not quite sure what it is for the whole region. Does he have? Is this just a bit of bluster, or
no?
Does
The initials for his program are basically HOPE, hope,
in English.
And the idea is basically very simple. The idea is about giving back to the countries surrounding the Persian Gulf the responsibility of assuring its security, and basically asking foreign powers to leave the area. But is it going to happen? I doubt it. I mean, who are the other countries in the Persian Gulf?
The Saudis,
the Bahraini authorities, the UAE. Although the UAE have had a fundamental shift in their strategy ever since the downing of the US military asset drone, because the next day they left the Yemen war, they no longer sided with the Saudis, and they sent a delegation to you, because they understood that something had changed.
You mentioned Yemen, and I think it's important. General Tankan, at this point in time, the path towards some kind of a thaw, wouldn't it be to de-escalate when it comes to Yemen? Is the time ripe for that?
Of course, the time is right for that. And what the Emirates just done is on the way of going down in the crisis, because the interest inside Yemen are not the same. The Emirates wants to have an access to the Red Sea. And so a sort of partition in Yemen will be very helpful for them. I just want to go back to your points on Asia, and I think you're very right. We must not talk about the balance of power, but the balance of oil. US doesn't need the Gulf oil. Asia needs really the oil from the Gulf. And so the fact that a sort of security outside the Gulf, in the hand of the people around the Gulf, for the people of Asia will be very useful for them. And but of course, I understand that the link, because the US don't need the oil, but they need to have a hand on the oil in the world.
Generally talk about.
But I don't understand why the Iranians think that the Saudis don't still want the Americans to protect their,
No, the Saudis want the Americans to
No,
protect
that's what I'm
them.
saying.
The
So, but why-
Saudis are
but I mean,
hoping
how
that
is
the
that-
Americans will fight till the last standing American GI for their interests.
But why does
what's
Iran think that they won't? I mean, why does...
There is this huge competition for power in the area. Nobody believes that Iran is going to actually invade them. What the Saudis don't want is that they don't want to go back to the second-level status that they had in the 70s when the Shah of Iran was around, acting as the gendarme of the Persian Gulf. When General Tankan talks about the Gulf, I mix up with the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of Guinea. You're talking about the Persian Gulf. But the issue is important. Why? Because today the question is no longer supply of oil. America has become independent because of shale gas. It has the capacity of producing even more oil than Saudis. What is important today is mastery of oil resources. And the only independent, standing country with sufficient resources to respond to the needs of China is Iran, the only country that has not fallen to American interests.
The country that's not fallen into American interests. And at this point in time, though, the Iranians, who, as you were saying, feeling the pinch of those sanctions more and more. And again, you got to wonder, when you look at skyrocketing inflation, when you look at all those broken promises when it comes to trade with the West, how long can it stay in its current status quo? Are they waiting again for that election cycle in the U.S. you were describing in part one of our discussion?
No, it can't go on forever. You can't promise an entire nation constant restrictions on civil liberties and unemployment. So the Iranian government is obliged to offer something to the Iranian people. And remember, 72% of the Iranian population is under the age of 40. They're highly educated, open-minded.
We heard chants last December when people were complaining about cost of living, saying quit it with the foreign interventions and spend the money at home.
Yes, that was a genuine movement in Iran. However, because of the American withdrawal from the nuclear agreement, JCPOA, as you called it, the Americans have managed to rally the Iranian people behind the Iranian government and lose the capital of sympathy that the U.S. had in Iran with the Iranian people. That's lost now.
I just don't understand. We understand that the Americans are withdrawing from the treaty, and that's thrown everything, putting the Europeans now in the American camp after the strikes in Saudi Arabia. But wasn't part of the deal that Iran was also going to change its behavior in the...
Iran totally complied with every single provision of the JCPOA. There are 13 successive reports issued by the International Atomic Energy Organization certifying that. The idea that Iran would change its attitude in the Middle East and that Iran would adopt a much more constructive attitude was the hope of the Obama administration, that over time, should the economics of a transaction work, would follow up, but the economics never worked.
Just turn the clock back 1 month, Annick Cizel, and there was that G7 in Biarritz, and people were saying, "Oh yeah, multilateralism is back," and
globalism.
It was just at the time when Italy had changed coalition governments, and there was this sense, and Donald Trump was a gracious guest to Emmanuel Macron. What are the prospects now as we head into, again, the silly season with elections in the U.S.?
My question remains tonight, when was Donald Trump's speech for the General Assembly, when was it written and by whom? Because it sounds so much like John Bolton or someone who's not by his side anymore. We have many Donald Trumps, we know this. This is not the end of the General Assembly. For some reason, I'm still waiting for what comes next, because definitely he was addressing his electorate. Definitely we found the old Donald Trump, but there was a Donald Trump who was more amenable to President Macron in Biarritz. Is it the end of the story? I mean, there have been so many flip-flops. Definitely... Donald Trump is not going to let go and just accept to meet on no... Well, he says he's ready to meet Hassan Rouhani with no preconditions. We know the Iranians want the precondition, which is understandable, that sanctions be lifted and certainly not upgraded again. Definitely the Saudi Arabian, shall I call it an incident, is recasting the dice here. But I'm not sure we've reached the end of the surprises on the American side. Maybe it's wishful thinking on my part tonight, but I think there are, as General Trinquant was saying, a lot of things that are being negotiated behind the scenes. There are people who are talking to one another behind the scenes.
Just to answer your question, multilateralism is there. Why all these people are in UN? Why are they in New York during 1 week to talk to each other? You know, the stage is very different. As I said, Donald Trump was speaking to electorates. So it was not speaking to the country. When he was in G7, he was speaking for the French citizen because he's a good friend of Mr. Macron. And as Mr. Trump said to Macron when he was talking in Washington, before just the speech, Macron tell him, you know, I will say things which are not really good for you. And he said, it's good for your citizen, go on. I got no problem with that. So I think really you've got Trump who is still the same. In the G7, he's speaking to help his friend Macron. And in the UN General Assembly, he's not talking to the 193 country, but to the citizen of the US citizen.
All right, and of course, it's what actions are happening, not just words that will matter when it comes to those tensions around Iran. I want to thank you, General Dominique Trinquant. I want to thank as well Celestine Bolen, Annick Cizel, Ardavan Amir Aslani.
Thank you.
Stay with us. Media Watch is next.
Thank you.
And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. So just to look at some of the reactions that coming in to Trump's speech, notably, and in particular the UN General Assembly speech that he gave. We're having some connection troubles, unfortunately.
Okay.
This does tend to happen.
That's the joys of live television.
It is indeed.
like home.
So here we go. I think, yes, great speech by real Donald Trump at the UN so far. So some people, obviously, fans of Donald Trump and thinking that his attacking the Iran regime's bloodlust and anti-Semitism was the right approach. This is why Trump won, and he deserved to win. So that's a backer of Donald Trump and the Republican Party. If you look at, this is somebody then on the other end of the spectrum, if you look at Trump's angry behaviour yesterday and his absolutely defeated tone today, Trump is clearly freaking out about impeachment. Don't believe his administration's messaging for a second. So basically, people reading into the body language and some taking from it.
Projecting,
what?
perhaps.
Taking from it what they will. Others saying that it was a profoundly bizarre performance. And indeed, if you look at the actual body language and the I suppose, level of his voice, it was particularly quiet and sedate. And he did stick to the teleprompter. So some people just found that completely bizarre. This is one reaction here by Corentin Célan, who is an observer of US politics and Donald Trump. This speech by Trump at the UN is a condensed version of his presidency. The form, the result. Well, maybe you can help me with translation.
It was resulting of a will to either mock his audience or else an inexplicable psychological failing.
Right. All of this against the backdrop of a nationalist doctrine and identity politics and just, pushing multilateralism to one side. So
Gosh,
a lot of people...
I didn't read all that.
Right, well, there you go. I should probably have translated it. This is another French take on Donald Trump's speech, saying that it's a reminder almost of the end of the Mitterrand years. Some people really... This is a real theory at the moment that Donald Trump is showing signs of not being very balanced and stable. So he shows the peaks of anger, and then his speech today actually did seem, some people wondering, had he been medicated or was his speech somewhat slurred? That's what some of the reactions were online. Well, it was very sedate, at least. In any case, afterwards, he did speak as well to the media. On Iran, I think we're doing very well. Let's see what happens on Iran. But we're in a very strong position on Iran, and I think they'd like to do something, and I think it's a very smart thing for them to do it. So that being analysed there as a typical Donald Trump reaction, the kind of formulaic answer he tends to give without the words great or terrific or other superlatives. Doing very well. See what happens. We're very strong. like to do something. So I suppose it's difficult to sort of take much away from speeches that can be interpreted in any way at all. In any case, some then are looking to just, I suppose, broader analysis. The Economist has been referencing quite a few tweets. America and its allies need to show Iran that it cannot use violence to get its way. So a lot of this, I suppose, is down to posturing. There was one further piece of analysis here from this is
Mark Dubovitz from the
Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
Very hawkish.
Right, very hawkish take on things. Getting the feeling here that there will be some US-Iran diplomatic breakthrough. Soon, the regime in Iran recognises Washington is winning as sanctions are squeezed. There's a narrowing of the gap between the US and the EU. So, they quickly need to... the Trump won't fall into their escalation trap, and it's up to Iran to reverse their escalation.
All right, so Annick Cizel thought there'd be maybe something happening, and maybe Artefon thinks...
Cuba's under sanctions since the 50s.
1962.
The Fidel family is still around.
Russia's
North Korea's under sanctions, God knows, since the 50s. They're still around.
All right, we'll be back to talk about it next. Many thanks, James. I want to thank our panel. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.